Hey guys, so today is finally the 6th installment of my sub-series of follow-up videos. A couple of weeks ago was the 1-year anniversary of Getting Lost number 6, the Outrigger Chase, which means I am now going to go back and revisit that video and address some of the comments that I received on that video. With that in mind, if you have not seen Getting Lost number 6, I really recommend that you watch that first before watching this. Otherwise, a lot of what I'm referring to won't make any sense to you. So yeah, if you would like to check that out or go back and revisit it, the link should be right up here. For this one, I think I'm gonna start at the end of the video and work my way backwards, just because some of the stuff that I have to say, it's less substantial at the end, and if you go backwards, it kind of gets more substantial. So I think it'll maybe flow a little bit better if we do it that way. So let's go ahead and dive in.
But if any of you have an alternative explanation that you think works even better, I would genuinely love to hear them. So feel free to comment those below.
So yeah, a few people did comment some alternate theories on this, and I did want to go ahead and address those. This first one comes from user Osro1980. They say, for all we know, Hurley, Ben, Walt, and others used outriggers when they returned to the island later on. Maybe they were chasing the other outrigger because they weren't expecting any other people on the island. So yeah, in this video, I kind of establish where all the outriggers end up by the end of the series. And it is certainly possible that the point in time at which Locke and company end up in the future, it's possible that that could have been, beyond the end of the series, and therefore maybe the outriggers end up there later on. Now, my only counterpoint against that idea, as far as like what I think maybe makes sense in the context of the show, basically kind of in my head, and there's nothing to say that this is right, but I kind of just imagine that the time travelers don't ever go past a point at which the source had been deactivated, just because the way I understand them flashing in time, it's a combination of their neurology as well as the pulsing energy of the island. Like I said, there's nothing that says that my interpretation of that is right, so it is perfectly possible that they could have jumped to a point in time after the series ended. With that said, though, I really don't like the idea of it being Hurley and his people shooting at the time travelers, just because that does not seem at all in character for Hurley, and it certainly doesn't seem in line with the better way of running the island that Ben refers to when he talks to Hurley in the finale about being the new Jacob. Now, another comment that's kind of along the same lines is from a user named Rahul. They say, there was a Jira stuff, so it's in the future. The Outrigger Chase, since it's not explained, one could think of as way in the future, after Hurley becomes the new Jacob. People can come to the island in the future too. Either Hurley brings them or they come on their own. And then these people who don't know the Losties, the time travelers, so they shoot at them. So yeah, that one's pretty similar to the other one. So without repeating myself too much, I find the idea that it happened after the series ended unsatisfying, for the reasons I said already, but also just because I find it less interesting and less compelling. The idea that in season 5 we see them show up at a time and get shot at by people who are not at all relevant to the story. I much prefer the idea that it is someone that we know with motives that we can consider and appreciate. And again, just going back to, what is suggested at the end of the series, that being that Hurley's going to protect and run the island in a better way than Jacob, it doesn't sit right with me that he would then be bringing or allowing this type of gun-toting, shoot first, ask questions later type of group to the island. And this last alternative possibility comes from a user whose name I'm almost certainly going to mispronounce, but I believe it's Jultum10630. And they say, what do you think about the possibility that it could have been Widmore's group? So yeah, somebody did show me that since I made this video last year, somebody else made a theory video about the Outrigger, and they had proposed that it was Widmore's people. And that's definitely an interesting possibility. One of the maybe weaker reasons that I don't think that is the case, again, just going from my interpretation of the series, is what I believe Widmore and his people were actually up to. If you've seen my most recent Getting Lost video, you'll know that at the end I kind of reveal a bit of that. And I will be diving much deeper into the specifics of that. But yeah, for now, suffice it to say, I don't think that, again, just based on my interpretation of the motives actually going on there behind that group, I don't think that's what was happening. Now, I did sit and watch that video before sitting down to film this, and they do briefly address the idea of Ilana and her group. But all they really say is that the off-screen mental gymnastics required to make that fit, I think it's too convoluted. I think that's approximately what they said. So I have no idea if they had seen my video or not, but I could see where somebody that watched my video would think that it seems convoluted because of the way I chose to explain it. Which, yeah, so to go off on a bit of a tangent, I did kind of want to explain. When I decided I wanted to do this topic, I was gonna, I think I say this in the intro to this video, but yeah, I originally was like, okay, I'm just gonna explain what I've always thought was the case, like what was my headcanon for the answer. And that was that I, for some reason, was under the impression for the past like decade that Ilana's group came over with 2 Outriggers. And therefore, yeah, it made perfect sense that maybe along their journey to the statue, that those 2 Outriggers end up on the beach. But as I started writing the script for this video and I went back and was watching the clips, I realized that I was delusional and they actually only came over in 1 Outrigger. And so from there, I was like, okay, well, so yeah, what I've been thinking all this time can't possibly be true. So I started to do what you see me do in this video, which is track the Outriggers one by one and see where they end up and when they're at certain points, etc. And basically, I had so much fun doing that. Like, you know, it was like the old days of watching Lost and investigating, you know, and trying to figure out the solution. So yeah, I found that so entertaining that I just made that the script. I thought maybe some people might get some level of that enjoyment out of me, you know, kind of narrating that process. Of course, for other people, maybe even most people, what you actually end up watching maybe is a bit tedious. And, you know, I think some people sometimes want you to just get to the point and just say what the theory is. And I try to find the balance between those two things. And I know I'm not always successful at finding that balance. But yeah, saying all that to say that while my detailed like recap of the Outriggers, it is fair to call that convoluted. I think the actual idea of Ilana's group doing it when I suggest they do it, and for the reasons that I suggest they do that, I don't think that's convoluted at all. In my opinion, that's not really mental gymnastics. Again, I don't know that the person that made that video had seen mine, and even if they had, I'm sure they weren't referring to my explanation specifically. But yeah, I just don't think that my proposed solution is much of a leap, let alone mental gymnastics. Now, I did just remember that they did say something else about Ilana's group. They kind of recap that they arrive on the main island in their Outrigger. They then head to the cabin, and then in the video, the person that made it states that they never go back to it. Now, what is undeniable is that we never see them go back to it. We are never shown them going back to that outrigger. But at the same time, we are also never shown them walking across the island from the cabin to the statue. Now, I'm not saying the obvious, inevitable conclusion is that they definitely went back to the outrigger. Again, that's purely personal interpretation. I'm merely challenging the idea that what was stated, which is that they never go back to it. That is not a proven fact. Furthermore, the acceptance of the theory that it's Widmore's group requires one to accept that there are more than the 4 outriggers that we see. And indeed, in that video, that is what that person puts forth, is that, you know, it's reasonable to expect that there are more than just the outriggers that we see. And basically, you know, we're seeing a bunch of the different outriggers at different times. And yeah, it doesn't... Widmore's group could have had access to several other outriggers that were on Hydra. And while I personally find it more fun and more satisfying to explain it with the outriggers that we know exist, while I personally feel that way, I absolutely do not think it's unreasonable for someone to suggest that and to believe it if they choose to believe it. The reason I bring it up is that, again, the person that made that video is clearly willing to take something that we don't see on screen and accept that as their interpretation of what happened. That being that there's an extra cache of outriggers on Hydra Island after the 3 are taken by the Ajira passengers. And yet they definitively refute the idea that Ilana's group went back to the outrigger. So my point is that in either case, you know, be it what I suggest about Ilana and her group, or in the case where it's Widmore's group, in either scenario, you have to accept and, you know, reach conclusions about things that happened off screen. Be that extra outriggers, or Ilana's group went back to their outrigger to circumvent the coast. Now, whichever one of those is more palatable to anyone watching this as an individual, by all means. I won't tell anybody that they're wrong for thinking that the Charles Widmore explanation makes more sense. I will not say that is definitively wrong. I'm just trying to express my perspective on why I personally feel that Ilana's group and the explanation that I put forth in this video makes more sense to me. Now, to kind of wrap that up, I would invite anyone that does subscribe to the Widmore's team explanation, if you have counterpoints that I have not addressed here, or that, you know, that you have in response to something that I just now said, please do leave that in the comments. Like, I read all the comments, and I try to respond to most of them when I have the time. So yeah, I definitely welcome that feedback. Again, when I was in high school, when Lost was airing, like, that was part of the Lost experience that I loved so much, was going to school the next day after an episode had aired and talking to my classmates and, you know, just kind of just sort of putting forth our ideas and debating those ideas and, you know, being like, oh, well, that doesn't work because of this. And then somebody being like, well, no, it actually does because of this. That's certainly one way in which my Getting Lost videos are inadequate in a way, because it is really just me giving my perspective, and there is no real pushback in the context of that video. There might be in the comments, and there might be conversations about it in the comments. But yeah, as far as people that are just watching the videos, you don't really get the debate, which I think oftentimes is at least as interesting as just somebody's theory. And that was a big part of the reason that I decided to do this follow-up series, was so that I could kind of bring some of this feedback and some of these counterpoints into the video format.
Am I saying I think this is what the writers had in mind when they wrote the scene? No, I'm definitely not.
So yeah, as I state there, I fully acknowledge that what I suggest and what most anybody can come up with for, you know, a canonical explanation of what happened in that Outrigger chase, it's almost certainly not what the showrunners originally intended when they wrote it. And that brings me to a comment from user Cucumber Cheese, who says, when the producers discussed their decision to not revisit this scene, there was mention of difficulties due to half the cast being dead at this point. Were they just speaking about Charlotte, Dan, etc., or could they have been referring to the other boat? My response to them was to basically say what I've always felt like might have been the original intention when they first wrote and filmed that scene. And basically the vibe I got when I first saw that scene was that at some point these time travelers that are being shot at were going to end up in that same time and end up on the other side of that shootout. And I don't mean the whole group, like it was going to be the exact same group of people. I just mean at least one, maybe a few of the same people were going to end up in the other boat. And then something that I think most people noticed when they watched that scene is that when Juliet fires back at the other boat, it appears as though she hit someone. Now, it's too far away to state that that definitely happened. And again, that's why in my explanation, where Ilana and her group were the ones shooting, obviously she doesn't lose anybody. So if they were hit, again, according to my explanation, if they were hit, it wasn't serious enough to have caused death or to have caused a visible, injury. Anyways, as I was saying, it does appear that she hit somebody. And so when I first saw that scene, when it first aired, I'm thinking, okay, yeah, eventually we're going to come back to this scene from the other perspective, and it's going to be at least one of these characters, much further down in the story. And as, the shootout's occurring, whoever that person is or one of those people are, they kind of realize what's happening. They remember, okay, yeah, no, we were the ones in that boat, and they kind of reach up to try and stop the other person from shooting, and then they get shot by Juliet. Again, that's just like the gut feeling that I had watching that, and having been familiar with a fair amount of other time travel stories that deal with, the whatever happened type of time travel. Now, because that was my initial thinking of what we would eventually see, I've kind of always interpreted anything the showrunners have said on this topic through that lens. And I personally think it makes sense, but again, like they could be talking about anything. But yeah, so when they talk about how in the final season most of the characters were dead, I think that's because by the time that you get to the final season, out of the 6 people that were being shot at, only 2 of them are still alive. Once season 6 starts up, Locke, Charlotte, Faraday, and Juliet are all dead. And that would leave only Sawyer and Miles to end up in that other Outrigger. And then, again, according to, my theory of what was going to happen, to then end up getting shot by Juliet's bullet. And so when they talk about not finding a way to do that organically, I think, yeah, I think a lot of people would have been really upset, specifically if Sawyer had been killed off in that way. It would just seem too random and cruel and kind of pointless in a way. And while people may have been less upset about Miles dying in that manner, I think the thing that they took into consideration was that, the more casual viewers, the people that weren't talking about the show all the time and, didn't remember that over a year ago there had been that Outrigger chase scene when they were time traveling, they wouldn't understand what they had just seen and what it meant and why, how that was significant, especially to the story at this point. Like how would that really be relevant to what the story has become by season 6? And so, yeah, that's why I think we never actually saw it on screen. Every time they tried to write it, they were like, yeah, no, this just feels too random and cruel and pointless. and unfair to the characters. Now, there's obviously no evidence to back up that that's what their plan was or that's what they intended. That's just kind of what I think maybe was going on and why it got scrapped. But only they really know.
I wish you never showed me what was in this damn box. What the hell are you going to do with it anyway?
We need to show it to somebody.
What for?
So they'll know who they're up against.
Which one of you is Ricardo's?
It's Richard, actually.
What lies in the shadow of the statue?
Dile qui nos omnes servavi.
Richard, I'm Ilana. I have something you need to see.
And this brings us to the last comment that I wanted to address today, and that is from user Lethologica02, who says, "The one thing I disagree with is the notion that Ilana's group was just looking for Richard, not Jacob. Ilana's first instruction was to head to the cabin. Then when they saw that the person they were looking for wasn't there, they headed to the statue. Richard wasn't at the statue or the cabin when Ajira landed on the island. And even though Richard has probably been to the cabin before in order to get lists from Jacob when Jacob lived in the cabin, we have no reason to believe that Richard spends a particularly large amount of time in the cabin normally. So I think Ilana was primarily looking to show Locke's body to Jacob. But since Richard was supposed to explain what to do if Jacob died, and was the only person who was supposed to know of Jacob's whereabouts, it made just as much sense to show him Locke's body as it did Jacob. Especially since they were right outside Jacob's living quarters when they revealed Locke's body." Okay, so yeah, I have a lot to say about this, and actually, this is one of those comments that actually turned into a very large discussion between me and Lethologica02. And like I've said in the past, if you enjoy those type of discussions, I really recommend that you go back and check those conversations out in the comments, because this comment and then what I'm about to say in response is really just a small part of what the two of us talked about. But yeah, in this discussion, I told Lethologica02 that I was hoping to do a video outlining my thoughts on the cabin and the timeline and who was in it when and whatever. I had hoped to have that out, in the not too distant future. That said, it's now been a year, and I can tell you that it's not exactly near the top of my list as far as my upcoming videos. So because of that, I did kind of want to share my thoughts on this in this video. I may still eventually do a Getting Lost video that goes a little bit more in depth and yeah, tackles the cabin in its entirety. But for now, to respond to what Lethologica02 said, for several seasons, we viewers believed that Jacob lived in the cabin because of Ben taking Locke to the cabin, the very first time we ever see it. It's John has demanded to see Jacob, Ben takes him there to that cabin, and then supernatural things start happening to indicate, okay, yeah, I guess Jacob was really there. And then it's not until 2 seasons or 2 years, if you were watching the show as it aired, later that you find out from Ben when the man in black, talks to him on the beach, that, yeah, Ben took Locke there having never seen Jacob.
What happened that day at the cabin? When you first took me to meet Jacob?
Well, you clearly already know that I was talking to an empty chair, John. That I was pretending. Which is not to say that I wasn't as surprised as you were when things started flying around in the room.
But why would you go to all the trouble to make something like that up?
I was embarrassed. I didn't want you to know that I had never seen Jacob.
And this conversation happens in the season 5 finale mere minutes after Ilana's group visits the cabin and they see that the ash circle has been broken. And she even says, He hasn't been there in a long time. Someone else has been using it. So whoever they're looking for, be it Jacob or Richard or anybody else, she's saying they haven't been there a long time, and she determines that someone else has been using it. And we know that that's the Man in Black from the fact that Christian with Claire was there in season 4 telling Locke to move the island, and so on. So yeah, now again, the only reason that we have to assume that Ilana was looking for Jacob at the cabin is that previous lie that Ben had told about them going to see Jacob. Now, the fact that Ben took Locke there and proceeded to put on a show would seem to suggest that he knew Jacob was not going to be there. Now, is it possible that Jacob had lived there before and then went back to the statue and Ben knew that Jacob had abandoned the cabin? Absolutely, it's possible. But my thing is why would he, after living for centuries in the statue, he would have had to have moved into the cabin after the purge. So we're talking like early 1993 at the earliest, and then he would have gone back to the statue within a decade, give or take. And I'm just not sure I see a good reason for him to have left the statue in the first place, and certainly to have only done it for such a short period of time. And again, especially given that the only suggestion that we have that Jacob lived there was what Ben had said. Now, what I think makes more sense to me is that we know Horace Goodspeed was building the cabin when the purge occurred. And then after he was killed, along with the rest of Dharma, the others moved into the barracks. Now, Richard, you know, he's from the 1800s, but even going into the more modern times, he's lived outdoors. And other than his occasional visits off island, he hasn't really interacted too much with modern technology. So in my mind, it makes sense that he would then take advantage of the cabin for the same reason that Horace was building it, you know, to take a break, to get away from, you know, this modern lifestyle that he's not accustomed to. You know, to just go somewhere and live a more rustic lifestyle. Now, I do think that it's perfectly possible and perfectly reasonable that Jacob maybe would have met him there to exchange lists and instructions and whatnot. In fact, I think Jacob using the cabin to some extent for some reason would be the best explanation for why the ash, you know, encircles the cabin. Given that Richard himself doesn't seem too aware of the Man in Black and how he works. Now, I do have a theory and explanation for what Jacob would have used the cabin for, why he would have had the ash around the cabin, and why Ilana and her group would have known about the cabin and to go there to look for, in my opinion, Richard. But I am going to save that for the video I will eventually do on Ilana and her group and who they were, how they knew Jacob, why Jacob entrusted them in ways that he didn't trust anybody else. But yeah, for now, back on track. Yeah, I agree that Jacob probably used the cabin to some extent. I do not think that he lived there. I think it was Richard's kind of escape, and I think that they used it as a meeting place from time to time. Now, I also think that Ben knew that Richard went out to this cabin, and he may or may not have known that Jacob would occasionally meet him there. But what I think happens at the end of season 3 is Locke is confronting Ben and you know, questioning the idea of Jacob, and you know, Ben doesn't want to reveal to Locke, this man who he finds very threatening to his power. He doesn't want to reveal to him that he has never met Jacob, and he, despite wanting to and asking to, he's never been entrusted with that. So Ben does what Ben does, and he lies, and he says he's the only one that sees and talks to Jacob. Not Richard, him. And so Locke then demands and demands to be taken to Jacob and challenges Ben's authority in front of his people until Ben finally decides, okay, I need to do something about this guy. So yeah, I'll tell him I'm taking to Jacob. And yeah, we know that he decides to put on a show for him. And yeah, if he knows about that cabin, what better place to set up a spooky scenario where, you know, you pretend to be talking to some invisible entity. And to make it even more spooky, you tell John to turn off his flashlight before you go in, you know, because Jacob doesn't like technology. But then at this point, the Man in Black sees what's going on and decides to take advantage of the situation, and he speaks to John. And speaking to John and not Ben, it accomplishes a few things. It further stokes that jealousy that Ben has of Locke. You know, we eventually find out that Ben is very upset about the fact that Jacob would never see him or speak to him. And then again, this guy that he is so threatened by, you know, and is worried is going to cause him to lose his power. Jacob apparently, you know, from what Ben understands, apparently spoke to Locke. And obviously this infuriates him, and then yeah, he tries to kill Locke. He asks him what Jacob said, and then yeah, he leaves him for dead. So that's what the Man in Black's interference in that sequence accomplishes as far as Ben, but it also accomplishes something as far as Locke. The Man in Black has already been exploiting Locke's blind faith in the island. You know, he's been manipulating that for his own ends already. But what I find is interesting to note is that season 3, in which this scene happens near the end, Locke's arc, in my opinion, from my perspective, it's establishing that he's not a killer. You know, in his first flashback episode at the beginning of the season, you know, we see that he has the opportunity and volunteers to kill this man to protect what he views as his family. But he can't do it. He's unable to pull the trigger even though he wants to protect his family. And then closer to the end of the season, you know, his father, who's done all this harm to him, Ben wants him to kill him, but Locke can't bring himself to do it. And it's not because Locke cares if he dies. You know, as we know, he actually goes to Sawyer and sets up the circumstances to ensure that his father will die. So again, it's not that he doesn't want to kill him because he cares about him and he doesn't want him to die. It's just he's not a killer. But the way that Locke's arc ends in season 3, the very last thing that he does is he murders a woman in cold blood. He's never met her. He throws a knife into her back and kills her, simply because what he perceived to be a taller, distorted version of Walt appeared to him and told him to do so. So yeah, I think him hearing the phrase "help me" from this supernatural entity that seems to be connected to, you know, the will of the island, and then seeing that vision of Walt telling him what he needs to do, it has pushed him. Like I said, he was already really devoted to the island, like had all this blind faith in it. But those two back-to-back experiences push him to the point where he's finally completely radicalized. He is willing to kill for the island. This man who, you know, a couple of days earlier was not a killer, had to have somebody else do the killing for him. Now, because of this, you know, perceived spiritual experience, he's now radicalized enough to where, yeah, he will kill for what he believes in. And obviously that serves the Man in Black's goals significantly. I mean, just him killing Naomi, that ensures that there will be conflict with the freighter folk. And with that conflict, the more likely it is that candidates will be killed. And indeed, candidates do get killed. And several more barely escape being killed. Sorry, it was getting dark, so I turned on the light. But yeah, that's basically what I think the Man in Black got out of that interaction and what was going on from Ben's perspective when he took Locke to the cabin. Now, I do think that it was the Man in Black in there and not Jacob because, again, like, the abilities that we see demonstrated in that cabin are not abilities that we have any reason to believe that Jacob has. You know, the fact that Jacob is flesh and blood, I do not believe that he can shapeshift the way that the Man in Black can take the forms of, you know, deceased individuals and such. And in that cabin sequence, we do see a brief glimpse of somebody that does not look like Jacob. He looks like an older gentleman, somebody that I think maybe was on the Black Rock. That's not relevant. The point is, yeah, like Jacob, as far as we've seen, isn't invisible. He doesn't, you know, throw things about using telekinesis. He doesn't use telepathy to speak to one person in a way that, you know, another person can't hear. All of these things are abilities that I would absolutely argue and intend to argue in my upcoming videos that the Man in Black does possess. Okay, but finally, going back to Ilana's group, another reason that I don't think that they were looking for Jacob when they go to the cabin is it doesn't make sense to me that they would need to show him Locke's body. When the Man in Black, in Locke's form, arrives at the statue with Ben, Jacob immediately knows, like he already knows that that is not Locke, that it is his brother. And he knows what he's there to do. So I certainly don't believe he would have instructed Ilana to do such a thing. And I'm not really convinced that they would have believed that he would need to see it. Whereas Richard, on the other hand, absolutely would. The thing that we need to keep in mind is that the Man in Black's plan, the whole reason that he's taken the form of Locke, is because that is the one person who can get Richard to bring an assassin, that being Ben in this scenario, to Jacob. You know, he can't, the Man in Black as Locke or as whoever else, imagine that he would have just taken Ben straight to the statue himself and said, hey, Jacob's in here, you're going to kill him because he did this shit to you a few years ago. Yeah, you devoted your entire life and made all these sacrifices for him, but I'm going to need you to do a 180 on all of that and kill him. Might Ben have done it? Yes, but the Man in Black kind of needs it to be a sure thing. You know, it's not like 150 years ago when he sent Richard to do it, and obviously that didn't work out. But instead, by pretending to be the leader of the others, by pretending to be this man that Ben was so jealous of and so threatened by, and to make Ben watch as Richard actually agrees to take him to see Jacob, the thing that Richard never agreed to do with Ben. It makes those things that happened all these years ago, it makes that all fresh again. You know, all these things that Ben lost and gave up for this man who never even acknowledged him. By now having witnessed Locke getting marched up there like Moses, as Ben says, that brings that jealousy back up. It makes him that much more easy and emotional to manipulate. Furthermore, by pretending to be this leader of the others, what the Man in Black can then do after having killed Jacob is go out to the others and command them to do whatever else he needs doing. And keep in mind that from his perspective, the only person that he has to worry about after he kills Jacob is Sun, because he doesn't know if she's a candidate or if Jen is, but she's the only one who might be a candidate that's still alive as far as he knows. The people that ended up back in the 70s, he believes they're dead. I mean, the bomb went off and they disappeared. Like, he has no reason to think that they are still alive. So basically, if he gets Ben to kill Jacob, he goes outside and has his people kill Sun, he's home free. You know, other than deactivating the source, you know, which, again, if you've watched my most recent video, you'll know that I think he was, you know, he had a plan for that. But yeah, that's why Jacob's last word about their coming, like that's why those infuriate him so much, is he didn't think he had as far to go as he actually ended up having to go. Anyways, the reason Ilana and her group need to show Richard this body is so that they can immediately undermine anything that this imposter would order these people to do. And if they get the body to Richard and the others in time, they can even prevent him from manipulating everyone into Jacob's death. So I do think the mission that they were on with Locke's body was to find Richard and the others, show them the body, and prevent the Man in Black from being able to use that plan to manipulate them. The problem with this is that it appears for the last few years, ever since they abandoned the barracks, Richard and his group have been living nomadically, and they don't know where exactly they're at. So where would be a good place to start? Again, according to my interpretation, this cabin that they know Richard would often visit. Of course, once they get there, they realize he hasn't been there in a long time, and somebody else has been using it. And so instead of sitting around and waiting for Richard, they know he's not coming back anytime soon because he hasn't been there in a long time. They set it on fire and they move on. And, you know, obviously they find the image of the statue, and that's how they know where to go next. Now, I do, of course, think that Jacob left them that image. It, of course, comes from his tapestry. What some people might ask is, why wouldn't he have just told Ilana and them to go to the statue to begin with? In my opinion, that's because there was a significant development between when he met with Ilana off-island and when they arrived. And that development was that Ben managed to maneuver his way onto the plane with the returning candidates, and suddenly the Man in Black, in the form of Locke, had the perfect assassin. And so once Ben has now come back with the candidates, this has really accelerated the Man in Black's plans quite a bit. He doesn't have to kind of figure out who to, you know, command to kill Jacob, who he can manipulate. He's got Ben, and he's pretty much ready to go. He only requires a little bit of pushing. And so because of this development, Jacob knows that the Man in Black is going to lead these people to him fairly quickly. And so he leaves the image of the statue and tells them where to head. I don't think that at that point he's thinking they'll catch up in time to prevent his death. I think if that was a big concern for him, he would have talked to Richard directly and been like, hey, you know, that's not Locke. You know, you're going to see him, but he's actually dead. I think if he cared enough to save his own life, he would have done that. So I don't think that was the motivation in him leaving that part of the tapestry. I think it was merely to prevent the Man in Black from continuing to manipulate the others into killing the Ajira passengers, killing whatever other candidates there were, etc. And obviously they end up being successful in that mission. They end up getting the body to Richard. It is too late to save Jacob, but again, I don't think that was really a concern for him anymore. But it was in time to prevent them from, continuing to fall for his deception. Once he emerges from that statue, they know that's not their leader, and they're not, following him anymore. So yeah, all of that's just me elaborating quite a bit more on why I believe they weren't looking for Jacob. They were looking for Richard and, his people. Like I said, once they get to the statue, they ask for him, and then they show him what's in the crate. And, as Bram had said before, they're showing him what he's actually up against. This is not something they would need to show Jacob. So yeah, I definitely have more to say about the cabin, and I do have more to say about Ilana and her group and who they were. But those things will be saved for other videos. Like I said, I obviously didn't go in depth into explaining why I believe they were looking for Richard, and I wanted to do that here. But yeah, I think that will do it. At the end of the month will be the 1-year anniversary of Getting Lost number 7, the non-productive system. And shortly after that anniversary, I will try and have the follow-up video for that one uploaded. In the meantime, if you want to watch that either for the first time or go back and revisit it before the follow-up comes out, you can do that by clicking the link right up here. And there should be another Getting Lost video between this and the next follow-up video. At least one more. Again, I try not to make any promises because I'm constantly running into complications and scheduling issues. But yeah, it is absolutely my intention to have at least one Getting Lost video come out in the coming weeks, and then I'll have the next Going Back video. So yeah, be on the lookout for that stuff, and I hope to see you then.
Oh, hello there. If you're like me, you can't get enough of Lost. So if you'd like to be notified when more videos like this one arrive, just click right up here to subscribe. In the meantime, if you'd like to check out other videos like this one, just click right up here. Or, if you'd like to check out a fun talk show filmed in an abandoned Dharma broadcast station, just click right over here. And as always, remember that this channel is like the island. It wants you to come back.